we recording? Yeah. The double where Golyadkin is convinced a clerk is trying to steal his identity and usurp his status. Perhaps Golyadkin is a paranoid schizophrenic, or perhaps not. The double, the Vionik in Russian, is also the quote-unquote fetch in Irish folklore, an apparition of yourself that appears to you as a portent of your imminent demise. At any rate, Freud captures something in this essay. It goes a long way towards explaining the experience of the uncanny and comprises an outstanding description of the affective dimension. But it doesn't go far enough. It's a little bit hard to read this out loud but I still want to do that. I'm able to focus more on it if I read it quietly, but for now I'm going to continue with this. I want to implement or produce and implement the most effective and efficient way for me to be happy about this recording. At any rate, Freud captures something in this essay. It goes a long way towards explaining the experience of the uncanny and compromises an outstanding description of the affective dimension, but it doesn't go far enough. It returns the uncanny to ourselves. It isn't truly other. It's the return of the repressed, the same, or that which lies, quote-unquote same, or that which lies within the field. It's the return of the repressed, it's saying that which lies within the field of the self, that which only seems other and unfamiliar because we repressed it. To be sure, Freud has valuable insights into what it is to experience the uncanny and the doppelganger effect. However, I want to claim it doesn't exhaust all encounters with doubles. In the next and third part of this series of ghost posts, I will contest or expand on Freud's view by telling you about mimic ghosts and what happened to me. What might the belief in ghosts commit one to? First off, by way of a philosophical detour, the concept of a ghost is thoroughly dualistic. Although there are precursors, Descartes is our most familiar and widely known figurehead of dualism in the West. He postulated in this separability and principle of body and mind. He could doubt the senses and think away the body. The only thing he couldn't think away was thought itself. Even doubting was a thought. Even whilst doubting absolutely everything, he was still thinking. He makes the move with the famous, I think that for Yen, cogito ergo sum. I don't know how to say that in French. Of association, he makes the move with the famous I think that for I am of associating his essential identity of who he is with thought. Everything else could be hyperbolically doubted. Of course, if the two were totally different substances, there was going to be a bit of philosophical grief over how the one could possibly influence the other. Martin Heidegger later questioned the association of self-identity with thought and wanted to know the nature of the sum and the amness. Who is this I? Okay, let me go ahead and take the liberty here to insert. We're going to go to, okay, we've got nextgenshaman.com open. So, excuse me. We're going to go to the shaman page. No, actually, let's hold off on that. No, well, whatever. Let's go ahead and do that. Hold on. Lovely. No, excuse me, the dictionary page. excuse me, individual, any entity with self-aware identity as distinguished from other entities. Identity, the state of someone and or something being aware of itself as quote-unquote I, and or the state of someone and or something being distinguished by others as quote-unquote it, she, he, them. um, if you're Donna, if you're not familiar with the my dictionary and with the Shaman page, I think it would be good, as I'm reading your article, to quite possibly be in a state where you've already experienced my dictionary and my Shaman page, which, if you haven't done so yet, if you go to anextgenshaman.com, so from anextgenshaman.com, let me put it this way, step by step, nextgenshaman.com. You click on either button, then you click on the button again. Kudos to my brightest lights. You scroll down, and you've got the links for the dictionary and for the fucking major shit in progress, which is what I call the Shaman page. I'm leaning 55 towards it might be good for you to pause and read both of these, even though, you know, I gave you a disclaimer the first time I gave you these two links, which I believe in my second email to you were the top links. Oh no, okay, where sort of embedded in the second link from the top that I gave you. So that'll be plan Y, which is the first one that I put there. And the hub page is the one that's got the link to the dictionary and the Shaman page and about Next Gen Tarot. So perhaps to have a more aligned dialogue about your ghost story, even though I didn't read part 1. Would be for you, or I could, or alternatively, while I am leaning more than 50% towards if you've read the Shaman page, and I was going to say, I said something about when you spent 2 to 7 hours max, I meant on these, drop me a line, because there's, in terms of direction, I would want to engage in a dialogue which is arguably absurd in the context in which, as I've said, I don't know if you'll ever hear these or can even physically hear this, much as there's a part of me that hopes that would actually be therapeutic, but it's quite possibly wishful thinking. But in the hypothetical scenario, which is therapeutic for me to imagine, because there's something there's something therapeutic about, you know, me having this type of relationship with you, even though I'm aware of the fact that it's only for the purpose of therapy for me, because of, as I've said, the fact that who knows if you would ever be capable of listening to this, and let's not even get into if you had the time and if you had the health to listen to these that doesn't necessarily mean that you would choose to devote the time to these. So obviously, I'm talking to myself, to my computer right now, but because it's therapeutic for me, it's better for me to continue as if we did have this relationship, and or dynamic, if relationship is a word that we're not comfortable with. But so if I say relationship, I mean this dynamic that is at this point only projected on my part. But uh, for the therapy to be good, while acknowledging the fact that this is just quote unquote in my mind that we're having this relationship, part of the therapy is to actually go through it as if we were. So in that sense, I want us to focus on alignment, and alignment for me would be that you, like I said, say 55% or so. I'm leaning towards it'll be better before we continue, quote unquote, reading your quote unquote we continue reading your text about ghosts and Freud. 55% leaning toward you haven't spent too much time on, but you have read the shaman page and the dictionary page from the quote-unquote formal shamanism page, which is nxtgenshaman.com/hub.html. The two links to the dictionary and the shaman page, the fucking major shit in progress is what it says right now. But as an alternative, what I was going to say is that it comes down to one of the fundamental things that I talk about the shaman page is that we're all one. When people talk about multiverses and some tangents of quantum physics that are very popular have to do with multiverses, and it's like, okay, if you're going to say we have multiverses, leaving aside the fact that I don't believe that we do, and I'd love to explain that, but if you're talking about multiverses, what do you call all of the multiverses together? You'd have to have a word for meta-universe. So by universe, I mean all of it. So even though I do not believe we have multiverses, in the hypothesis that we do, I would still use the word the universe to describe all of the multiverses together. And I've been doing this mantra recently. So this could be, like I said, now I'm getting to the alternative of if you don't want to, if you want to postpone reading the dictionary and the shaman page, but it could obviously work if you've read them too. But the alternative to that is I'm trying to make a summary. And the mantra, one of the mantras that I've been doing recently is another way of looking at it. It's a double mantra. I want to implement and or produce and implement the most effective and efficient way for me to always let in me all that wants in me. I want to implement and or produce and implement the most effective and efficient way for me to always let out of me all that wants out of me, which is actually a scary mantra unless you have deep faith. And I thought of myself, I thought, okay, let's say that quote unquote God, the universe, all, okay? That's a luxury that, if quote unquote God, and by God I mean the ultimate mystery and so on and so forth, but I don't look at God as something that is outside of us. So when I talk about God, a lot of the shaman page is about what does it mean to talk about God, because you have people that argue God exists, God doesn't exist, but they don't agree on what God means, and basically say, okay, if by God you mean something that is all-powerful and all-knowing, then you can't say that's not part of God, that's not part of God, everything is God. But we distinguish. In the beginning was Logos, which has to do with the fact that I name me, me, and you. You're Donna, I'm took. This is my index finger, this is my thumb finger. We're all part of the one, but we distinguish. And I thought, if you call it God or the universe, which is all of it, it does not have the luxury to be able to say, I'm going to let in me all that wants in me, and I want to let out of me all that wants out of me, because out where and from where? So only an entity that is within the one, if we say the universe is one, the universe cannot allow itself to say, I want everything that wants in me to come in me, and I want everything that wants out of me to come out of me, because if it comprises all, it's all within. However, it gets trippy, but since you're mentioning in your article in part 2, you're talking about where did it go? Did I just lose it? Where did it go? Okay. Dualism. If the two were totally different substances, there was going to be a bit of a philosophical grief over how the one could possibly influence the other. Heidegger later questioned Amnes, who is this I? Okay, I, identity. That's why I wanted to point out to the dictionary and the shaman page, and specifically with the dictionary, I is a definition that I have about identity. So that I define an entity as either anything and or life form, or all things and or life. Individual I define as any entity with self-aware identity as distinguished from other entities. So this is in the context of, okay, let's say that the universe is all one, and it doesn't have the luxury to say there are things outside of me. I have the luxury to say, you know, you are outside of me, the computer is outside of me, the pasta is outside of me until I eat it. You have the trouble of saying that, you know, you have this benign tumor or whatever in your brain or whatnot that is in you, so that's part of you, but it's something that's in you, just like your knee is in you, and every cell is in you, and there's cells and things that are outside of you. And then obviously we're all part of one, and we're all connected, but so if we're distinguishing things, and an entity is anything or life form, and an individual is any entity with self-aware identity as distinguished from other identities, and then we go to identity, the state of someone and or something being aware of itself as I, and or the state of someone and or something being distinguished by others as it, she, he, them. Notice that I don't use we or us in the examples for identity. It's something that we could talk about, but some of these notions are a shortcut to the stuff that I'm saying in the dictionary and the shaman page to continue with your writing. Who is this I? The phenomenological tradition in philosophy was anti-Cartesian, and the identity of the I was put back into the body as it were. There was no such human being as one disinterested from its embodiment. All thought, all consciousness, all cognition and perception could not be dislocated from our situatedness as embodied beings, but the concept of a ghost or any other quote-unquote spiritual entity reopens the Cartesian conflict, the Cartesian coffin. Once more we have a distinction in principle between the mind and the body. Well, what I would say is this distinction between the mind and the body might be questionable in the sense of, if we try to combine my dictionary with your text, and you're talking about once we have a distinction in principle between the mind and the body, before you continue to say what is a ghost, we have a distinction, and let's say that we have a distinction in principle between the mind and the body. Then it's easy for us to say, this is my body, this is Tuk's body, and this is Donna's body, okay? As far as the mind, obviously, it gets more complicated. Now, arguably, even the body gets complicated, but it's simple to say, this is my body, this is your body. What about your mind and my mind? Well, if we're going to, again, do a Gordian knot type of cut here, it goes back to what I say in the Shaman page in the dictionary, meaning that either it's all one mind, or it's not all one mind. If it's all one mind, we might as well call it God. We might as well call it the universe. And we might as well call it the oneness. We might as well call it the all. But if we do that, then there's no point in distinguishing Donna from Tuk, mind from body, or once from more, from we, from have, from a, from distinction, from the comma, from the space between the n and distinction and the comma. If we're going to have, if we're going to say, if we're going to use words, we're going to use naming of things that we distinguish the comma from the n, and the, you have the sentence here. It says, once more we have a distinction, comma, in principle, comma, between the mind and the body, period. It starts with the capital O in once, okay? Now I am distinguishing between the n in distinction and the comma. I can also distinguish between the comma after the word distinction from the comma after the word in principle, okay? Either we're going to have distinction or we're not going to have distinction. And what I'm saying is that let's acknowledge the fact that the comma and the pixels in the comma are all manifestations of the one. Now, if we then go to the distinction between the mind and the body, then it begs the question, whose mind? Because if it's God's mind or the universe's mind, we're not distinguishing it from somebody else's mind or something else's mind, because we're starting from the presumption that God or the universe or whatever word that we want to choose, let's use the word the universe or the disclaimer that I made, it's all. There's nothing else that you can distinguish it for, and that's where we're getting into the mystery beyond our ability to understand, because inevitably the human mind goes to, okay, is there an edge to the universe? We can't go there. That's what I addressed with the Shaman page. Our mind can't go there right now, because the minute you visualize all the universe, whether you see it as a sphere or you see it as a blob or you see it as a torus, which I think is probably the best way to see it, even when you see it as a torus, our senses and our minds find it impossible right now to not have a question about where is the edge? what's outside the edge. So that's mystery. That's beyond our ability to discuss right now. What we can discuss is the dot on the I in this in distinction versus the dot on the I, and you know, and at that point we're saying, okay, we have a distinction in principle, you say, between the mind and the body. Well, we just need to take that question of whose body into whose mind. And if we say, okay, we acknowledge the fact that it's all one mind, but then which mind is my mind, which mind is your mind, and which mind is Descartes' mind? Well, Descartes' mind is the mind that can say, I am Descartes. Donna's mind is the mind that can say, I am Donna. Took's mind is the mind that can say, I am Took. And that's why we go back to the dictionary where it says, let's do Yoda. Instead of reading it normal, I'm going to read it Yoda. If you have the page open to, in fact, I'm going to take a screenshot right now, okay? And I'm going to call it I. And I'm probably going to put it on the page. So that way you don't even have to open another page. So if we look at what it says, identity, the state of someone and or something being aware of itself as quote-unquote I. And we read it Yoda-like, and we go, quote, I, unquote, as itself of aware being something or an someone of state. The equals identity. I as itself of aware being something or and someone of state. The equals identity. It's worth looking at the word state, which, because I know where some of these are, but with the dictionary, and this is where you wouldn't use an image file, you'd have to have the thing open, but you just do a Control F and search for the word. So state, I've got 14 numerology, is very interesting here. And ironically, even though I use the word state 14 times, it's not until I think the very last that I define the word state, because there's a shamanism in the way that I developed this dictionary. The definition of state, is it number 14? No. So the definition of state is, okay, number 12. I put the hangman. I put myself here exactly. I'm going to take another screenshot here. I'm going to save this as file, save as I, etc. I'm going to Control E, go to 14 inches. Oh wait, Control Z, Control E, change the background to black. Okay. try this again. Control E. I got 7, I meant 14 inches. Okay. Now we're gonna put this paste. Okay. So this is my definition of the word state. And by the way, one of the things that I want to do is I want to find somebody or people, ideally the whole world, with the top choice system. If you go to the topchoicesystem.com, agree on a dictionary that we refer to. But right now it's all a monologue. However, I'd rather have this monologue with you right now. So state, my definition of state. Let's start, let's do this Yoda-like. I'm going to read it backwards. Entity and of entity and not end. Entity and of coordinates or and attributes V equals state. State equals the attributes and or coordinates of an entity. Hold on a second, I gotta check something. Okay, I was uploading the first video, the audio. Now, oh, which reminds me. I'm gonna go ahead and continue. So, your article says, once more we have a distinction in principle between the mind and the body. Let's merge this sentence in your article with the dictionary, with the premise that I've said distinction between whose mind and whose body. More than a premise, I'm repeating. So the cart Donna took, anyone that in their mind can say I is an entity. The attributes and or coordinates of an entity is the entity's state. I'm in Rome. I got a big nose. I'm precisely here where I'm looking at the computer. It says 8:03 a.m. on 2016-02-23. And except for quote-unquote God, the universe, or all of us together, I am the only one that can say I about myself in terms of my identity and my individual self. Now, I didn't read much the card, although to me the fact that it said I think that 4 a.m. is one of the most important, fundamental, it's so fundamental to any mystic study and understanding of reality. But can we say that the cart's mind exists? People are going to be able to read your articles and hear my audios. Although right now they're the ones for you are unlisted, meaning that you can only access them if you have a link to them. It would be wonderful if we both felt comfortable with my changing them to public videos, because just like I'm finding your articles and I'm getting into the fact that you're an intellectual and a beautiful woman and somebody that does tarot and has studied things that are relatable to the things that I've studied and talks about things that are relatable to things that I want to talk about, and we want a human connection. But I don't know if you're ever gonna hear this. There could be some other woman or women that hear me talking to you, and they're the women that I'm supposed to talk with. And let's say that they find these when I'm dead. Would my mind be alive? Maybe it'd be therapeutic for those women to hear these audios. Would that be my mind? Well, it would be my mind according to whoever's listening to it. But unless I am there to say this is me, it's not my mind. Now, I'll always be there if this audio actually gets saved, because sometimes I have technical glitches, saying it's 8:06 a.m. in Rome and I am me. So you could play it back at 8:07, you could play it back in free territory or 15. So in that sense, my mind will always be there. But will there be an entity? Because there'll be an entity of the video and the audio. And the entity is the audio. There'll be the entity of the zeros and ones that make up the bits and bytes that make up the digital form of the audio. And we'll be able to point to the entity of that zero and that one and that bit. But in terms of distinction, much as I love the fact that the more that we can actually record abstractions, which is probably the primary thing that distinguishes us from all other creatures that we know, our capacity for reproducible abstraction. Because as I've said time and time and again, a wolf that howls, which is how I often feel, or we often feel when we're trying to find somebody to talk with. Hello, Patty, from Facebook. No, she's not talking to me, but Facebook is. Okay. You know what? Oh, shit. Hold on. We're gonna, because I clicked on that. Oh, wow. But I want to go back to, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to copy the link because it opened it up on the page where I had your picture. I still want to look at your picture, but I might send you this link. So now I'm opening. So Patty, I might see, maybe I want to share this with Patty, although she's, God, she's cute, but she's blonde and she's young and she probably hasn't studied Saussure and Lacan. There's room for everybody. Maybe she can connect, have a dynamic relationship with your significant other. And so long as they don't touch on the taboo zone, we're all good. But the audio is an entity, just like the zeros and the ones, and each zero and each one is an entity. And ultimately it comes down to the most subatomic particle that we can get, which comes down to quantum mechanics, which I think logically defeats the notion of multiverses, because Now, this is something that I want to address somewhere else, but while there may be the entity of an audio made up of the entity of the zeros and ones that make up the digital format of the audio, and I'm the first one to admit that in a way, yes, my mind will continue because our capacity for abstraction, like I said, the wolf, you could argue that the wolf or even a tree creates an abstraction in their expression, but it's not reproducible. When you use the word distinction in your it goes back to the signifier and the signified. So for all practical terms, there's only one identity. There's only one entity who can say I, and it's the one entity that can say I about oneself. So I'm more inclined to put it in simple terms. I'm more inclined to say that it's the mind of quote unquote God that manifests itself through Tuk in his body and his mind when Tuk's body is alive, and in Tuk's mind when Tuk is dead. But I think that even though I'm repeating myself, it's fundamental to understand that only I can say I, and that goes for any entity that can be aware of itself as I, including the wolf and including the tree and including the cells. An individual cell in a tree is aware of itself as I. But in a sense, the tree is the only one that can say I. The tree is an excellent transition between this distinction and disconnectedness, because the tree has roots, which is a visual ramification of, yeah, we can say that's a tree, but the roots almost fractalize into the connection with everything else. So what I do have to say, even though it sounds extremely presumptuous, is that much as I don't know a lot of the references that you're referring to, and I haven't studied all of the formally recognized philosophers that you studied, although I was bombarded with references to them in graduate school and undergraduate school, there's an element of academia which is talking for the sake of talking. What I appreciate about somebody such as yourself is that you actually, I think, go a step above that. And I personally find that it's very important to go a step above the talk and go into the action, and the action has to be for your happiness and for everyone's happiness. But I also really want to enjoy talking with you. Like I said, I love Patty. I mean, I don't know if she is, but my Facebook friends are not really people that I know. It's a stupid story, but she was nice to me a couple of times when I asked her for friendship. She seems like one of those people that's very nice, but I don't really talk to her or know her. But I'm sort of inspired by her when the rare times that I check Facebook, and when I see her now, since my Facebook was on, I got an automatic thing that said, "Oh, Patty just posted something," and so on and so forth. But when I was talking about the car, like I said, I'm repeating myself. There's room for everyone, but I'm not. Patty is not somebody that is writing these articles and maybe she's not interested in being somebody that's writing these articles. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know her, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe she were to get into them. But I get into them. I get into writing about this intellectual stuff. But I was gonna say I know it sounds presumptuous, but I actually think that these thousands of years of philosophy and these uh, thousands of papers in academia, sometimes I think I'm a little smarter because I don't care if you're quoting Heidegger or kindergarten. I mean, you and I actually love this. I have a love-hate relationship with this. But the point is that do we come to a conclusion, and do we come to a worthwhile conclusion? So I'm reading all these questions that go on for thousands of years about what is the mind, what is the body, etc., etc. It's like, dude, it's a wonderful dance, but let's start with the dictionary. Let's use logic and understand that maybe we can answer questions such as what does your self-identity look like if you don't have a body? Not just ask the questions, but answer the questions. Once more, we have a distinction in principle between the mind and the body. And it's important to have a distinction between every word that we use and an agreement about what we mean. And a lot of these answers, a lot of these questions that get asked by philosophers and academics for thousands of years can be answered if we agree with our words to what we mean with our signifiers. And if our signified goes, instead of to loops and vagueness, to other signifiers, and we have a dictionary that says mind equals this, and mind, do you see what I'm saying? So if I'm looking at my dictionary and I'm saying comfortable equals without needs and or without stress, I've got, if we're going to keep it super simple and we're going to get into the dots of the I's and the zeros and the ones, my signifiers are comfortable, my signifier is the equal sign, my signifier is without, my signifier is needs, my signifier is and slash or, that's a compound signifier, my signifier is without, and my signifier is stress. Most of these signifiers, what is their signifieds? This signifieds you're going to find in the dictionary, not for all of them, because the dictionary is, our vocabulary is made up of tens of thousands of words. But by pointing to a signified within the dictionary, I can look up stress. And here I have two signifiers, comfortable and stress, that I know I can find the signified within the same page. So if we're talking with Descartes and Vonnegut and kindergarten about what does I mean, if we have a page, even if there's only two of us, but if we have a page where we can agree, what's relaxation? Relaxation is the signifier. A state of comfortable rest. What does it signify? It signifies a state of comfortable rest. Well, guess what? I've got, what's the signified of the signifier state? We've got it in the dictionary. What's the signifier of the what's the signified of the signifier comfortable? I've got that. What's the signified of the signifier rest? I've got that. And it comes down to what I talk about in the Sham page, which is yes or no. In other words, it doesn't matter if we look at, if we say rest equals X, Y, Z, or rest equals running a marathon. If the dictionary says rest equals running a marathon, while we might almost necessarily get into truth, epistemology, and ontology and argue about whether or not it is true that rest equals running a marathon, and I'm going to say that it does not. Although there was times when I needed a rest and I drove from Boulder, Colorado to New York because that was restful for me. Okay, but even if I might disagree that the point is if I don't disagree. In other words, if there's two people and to them they agree, it says here rest equals running a marathon. If they both say yes, without getting into whether or not it's true, we have agreement of their signifiers and their signifieds, which is a it's the most important foundation for communication between and or among verbal entities. Because at some point, there's a side to being able to go from asking what is a ghost, but let's go back to academia and thoughts of philosophy. To there's a time, there's a value. I really, the reason I'd rather talk with you than with Patty is because you've written these papers. But there's much as there's a value for me and almost a need for me, and it creates comfort for me, and it's therapeutic for me to talk with somebody that can write papers and papers and papers and read papers and papers and papers about philosophy, and I want that in my life. I don't know if I can live happily without that in my life. There's also, at the same time, an apparently contradictory, but in actuality, worthwhile value to also being able to go from the talking and the questions to the answers, to go from the question, what does your self or identity look like if you don't have a body, to the answer to what does your self or identity look like if you don't have a body. Although that's not, in a way, I've sort of addressed that a few minutes ago. But so now let's continue and get into this ghost thing from a Freudian angle too. You would not have the same consciousness or self-consciousness anymore. That's precisely, thank you, that's precisely what I was saying earlier. If you did, wouldn't that be a memory since you no longer have a physical body? Okay, you would not have the same consciousness or self-consciousness anymore. Obvious, because if nothing else, you wouldn't have the consciousness of your body. And if you had self-consciousness, it would not be the same as before. If you did, wouldn't that be a memory? Precisely. So if you perceived the same self-consciousness as before you had a body, that would be a perception, that would be memory. What does the memory inhere in? Excellent question. See, that's the other thing, Donna. Part of the reason that, excuse me, this is therapeutic, and I probably shall send these to you, even though we've already explained the context of your situation, and they may be monologues. It's not just that you're a beautiful woman that happens to have the kind of interests that are fundamental to me in a dynamic that is worthwhile for me with somebody. But it's also that I appreciate your thinking, because there could be somebody else that would have the same PhD and intellectual shit that I'm interested in, and also is interested in tarot, and but I'm not sure that there'd be the same resonance that I'm finding with your mind. So let's continue. What does the memory inhere in? Can one have a free-floating consciousness without a body? Because see, when you say what does the memory inhere in, yeah, no, that's obviously there be sort of a wavelength and energy. Everything emits some kind of energy, and it's traveling through the cosmos. Although at that point, would that memory have a self, or would that be just like a cell in a tree, be part of the cosmos's consciousness, and the only identity that we could attribute to that memory would be the consciousness? In a way, the memory itself would be the entity. If the memory, well, memory is a little different here, but if you imagine the thoughts, the energy, the wavelengths, whatever it is that's mysterious, that's being manifested right now of myself, and you imagine it as a wavelength of subatomic particles in the cosmos. Again, I'm not sure it'd be me so much as it'd be those subatomic particles, but then it gets into the roots of the trees, and where do they end, and where does the earth or the dirt begin? In other words, would you be able, just as we can distinguish, we can say, okay, the root of this tree ends here in this dirt. If you go look at the RoboCop thing, we wouldn't be able to, there'd be a vague area, but the approximate of where the root ends and the dirt begins. But if you look at the tip of one branch of the root, but if we approximate it, we can say, okay, this is part of the root, which is part of the tree, and this is not part of the root, it's the dirt around the root. And so in that sense, if we do an analogy, and we could sort of do an analogy about Okay, well, the audio would be analogous to the root or the tree because the audio would have a beginning and an end. And then the cosmos is the dirt. But a specific, would we be able to go more specific than that and say the thought about I and the thought about memory, we distinguish them as two different thoughts? We just did verbally. I can say there's a thought that I have, there's an answer that I have about I. There's not quite an answer that I have about memory. But with words, we can say, okay, we can use the word memory, and if I say that the memory is that combination of subatomic particles in which the majority of the subatomic particles refers to the memory, just like the majority of the cells in a tree, from the cells in the tree's leaves to the cells in each branch of the roots, refer to the tree. They all also refer to the dirt and the air and the spring and the universe or the smog. But if we say the majority, the one thing that the cells in the leaf and the cells in the trunk and the cells in the roots quote unquote refer to the tree more so than other things, then hypothetically maybe we could visualize a waveform in the universe that is the thought about memory, that even though it merges with all the other thoughts, not just mine, but of the tree and everything else in the universe, we could be able to pinpoint them. But then their identity would be just like the identity of the tree. So would that, I guess then you could extrapolate that if all the energy waveforms of my thoughts and the cosmos, all the energy waveforms of the thoughts of Donna's thoughts in the cosmos, that can, wherein the majority of the elements of those thoughts refer to, not refer to, but are attributable to Donna, then the entire, the totalness, the total of all of those would be Donna's identity in the cosmos, even after Donna doesn't have a body. And perhaps relationships have to do with, one of the things that I always think about is that there's, when you're looking at two people that have a relationship, whether it's a sibling relationship, a friendship relationship, an intimate relationship, a work relationship, a 5-minute relationship because they're giving you a parking ticket or whatever, but that relationship, we look at the two people, but there's a third element, which is the relationship, meaning that it's the interaction between them. If that creates these manifested waveforms in the universe, if you're getting a parking ticket and it's the parking cop and you're exchanging 5 minutes where you're talking about, but the reason I parked here and it says, and so on and so forth. Okay, and let's say that that creates a relationship which creates a waveform. I'm just using the term waveform right now in the cosmos. Then after your body's gone and the body of the parking Nazi is gone, the identity of the relationship would be in the cosmos if it can be identified in this thing that I'm for shorthand calling the waveform. And so if you then extrapolate to, long lasting relationships where if you're with somebody for a lifetime and they're the most intimate relationship that you have, that relationship has its own identity. Anyway, can one have a free-floating consciousness without a body? Are you and are you you anymore? How would you understand? This is fascinating. How would you understand pain, sensory pleasure, vision, hearing? Don't all of our shared concepts presuppose an understanding of who we are as refracted through both our personal and our shared embodiment?